Okay, so we're on Kuf Chav Zayin Amud Bais, and we're smack in the middle of the page. This line starts B'Shabbos. We're starting from Lema Masayle. Let's say that this is a raya to Shmuel. Shmuel gave us something interesting. He said that it's possible that something could be considered food regarding Tumah. However, it's not considered food regarding Shabbos. So, for example, these dried figs on the tree, they're already considered food because they're dried figs, which means that it's considered like they're removed from the tree, because if it's attached to the tree, it can't be considered food. However, regarding Shabbos, if someone takes it off, he's chayav, which means that it's not considered food regarding Shabbos. It's considered still attached.
The reason he's over because he's doing one of the Lamed Tes Malachos, right?
Yeah, but if we say that it's food and it's dried up and it's considered not on the tree anymore, then you shouldn't be chayav.
Right.
Lema Messiah, let's bring a raya to Shmuel. It says, Yerakis Shetzamku Be'iveihem. Same as we said before, the only thing is now we're dealing with vegetables.
What page?
Kuchav Zayin, Amud Bais.
Okay.
So, vegetables that dried up also on their stalk. Kagoina Kruva Dalas. For example, what's kruva? Cabbage? What do they say it there? Cabbage and a gourd.
Cabbage and a gourd.
Dalas is a gourd or a pumpkin. These are dried up. It says ein metamet t'masaycha, and they're not tamei. The reason why they're not tamei is because they become like hard like wood. When they become dry, you can use them as fuel in a furnace. So they become dry and they're not edible anymore. Even though they're attached to the tree, that's considered they're not considered food. Katzitzan, there's not much of a chiddush in that. That's interesting. That first part of the Mishnah, they're dried wood. You know what I'm saying? It's like there's nothing there. However, katzitzan v'yavshan, if he cuts them and he dries them, the tamet t'masaychlan, they are tamei as food. They are susceptible to tumah as if they're food. Now the problem is if they're dry, then they're wood. They're not food. They're not food. Wood. Firewood doesn't become tamei. It needs to be a Eily, it needs to be food, it needs to be something of substance. Plain wood doesn't become a branch off a tree doesn't become tamei. This is like a branch off a tree. So the Gemara asks.
I don't know if this matters. It says, but if one cut them and then in parentheses while they were still moist.
One second.
And then he dried them.
1 second.
Okay.
So the Gemara asks first. Katzitzan v'yavshan sal kadaita. Gemara asks. That's what you're saying? It's metamet t'masaychlan. If you cut them and you dry them, eitz bi'almahu. It's pure wood. It's not tamei. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak explains this is what you were saying. Ba'almanas liyavshan. He cut them, and he intends to dry them, but he didn't dry them yet. So even though he's not thinking about using them for food, but right now they are food. But he intends to dry out this gourd and to use it. He intends to use it not for food. He intends to use it as fuel to burn. He wants to dry it and burn it. So, but nevertheless, right now it's still considered food. So right now it's still makabel tumah. That's what we learned from here. So here we have a chiddush. We have something that's not meant to be, that's not planned on being used as food, and nevertheless it's makabel tumah. Now we go back to the original case here, is that if you dry it while it's on the tree, it's not makabel tumah, it comes wood. Time of the kruva dalas. We think here that what's the chiddush? If you have dry wood that's on the tree, it's not makabel tumah. What's the chiddush in that? We think what the chiddush is that it's only a case of kruva and dalas that when they dry they turn into wood, but other things that would turn into dried foods would be makabel tumah. That's what we're thinking here. The chiddush is not what we're saying. The chiddush is what we will deduce from that. Time of the kruva dalas. The reason why it's not makabel tumah is because it's a cabbage and a gourd. Given the yavshan la b'nei achila ninu. Because when you dry them, they're not considered food. Shar peiris, but other types of fruits, metama, they would become tamei, even though they're attached to the tree. The Gemara asks, hey chidami, what's the case? Idi yavshu hein v'uktzayen. If they're totally dried, them and the stem that's attaching them to the tree, which means that it's as if it's severed from the tree. Pshita, of course it's going to be makabel tumah. Then there's no chiddush in that either. Because we're looking to, what are you telling me? You're telling me that wood is not makabel tumah. You're telling me that the fruits that are dried off entirely with the stem, that it's not considered attached to the tree. All of that is obvious. Elal av, it must be that the chiddush here in the first case is below yuktzein, that the fruit is dried, but the uketz, the whole thing that's holding it to the tree is not dried, and nevertheless we consider it severed from the tree regarding tumah, and that's a raya to Shmuel. We were trying to bring a raya to Shmuel that in certain instances it's considered attached to the tree. Regarding certain halachas, it's considered attached. Regarding certain halachas, it's considered detached. So this is a raya to Shmuel, because only regarding tumah it will be makabel tumah. Regarding Shabbos, if you cut it off, you'll be chayav. The Gemara says it's not a good raya. You tried, but it's not perfect. Because lo'olam hein v'oktzein, really you could say that the entire thing is dried. You asked, so what's the chiddush? If it's totally dried, you want to tell me that if it's wood, it's not makabel tumah. If it's a fruit, it is makabel tumah. That's obvious. The katzitzan namanas liyavshin, it's shichlei. I can always tell you that the chiddush is the seifa. There's no chiddush in the reisha. The chiddush is in the seifa. The seifa says that if you dry up the wood, if you cut it off with intention to dry it, so until it dries, it's considered edible. That's the chiddush. That even though you have no intention of eating this, but the fact is, right now it's still food.
Normally not become makabel tumah because it was dried, but since it's wet,
since it's not dried yet,
it can become
right. You see, a lot machshava is a big deal when it comes to tumah. Here, my machshava is not to eat it, and nevertheless it's makabel tumah. That's a chiddush. Why? Because the fact is, right now it's still food. Okay, Tashima, come and listen. Ilan shenifshach ubayt peris. See, this case wouldn't have been significant to me until recently. I have a saw that I use to cut coconuts, but it's electric. You know, and at the end of the handle, you have a thing that you can do, so it's tall. You know, it extends up. It's not tall enough, but it's tall. So after I cut the coconuts, it's very heavy on the wrist. So it falls down. No one could stand there. So it falls down. As it's falling, it cut off a branch off a different tree. So
you named this tree?
No, it was actually a fruit tree, which I wasn't planning on cutting. Any branch there, it's a loquat. I didn't cut it down. A branch came off it. So on the loquat branch, there was fruits that are attached to it. So here I have the case right here. Ilan shenifshach. If you cut a branch off a tree, and ubay peris, and on the branch there's fruits. So it got a little trimming. So hariyan ketlushin, those fruits are considered off the tree. They're attached to a branch, but the branch isn't attached to the tree, so they're considered off the tree. Considered fruits. That means that they'll be makabel tumah. Also, it means that if you remove it on Shabbos, it's not chayiv. Yavshu, let's say they dried on the tree. That's the case that we've been dealing with. So now we say hariyan kimechubarim. They're considered attached to the tree. It's a little different than what we just said. We said that if they're dried on the tree, they're considered detached off the tree. So the Gemara says like this: my love, is it not? Ma telushin, what does it mean when you cut it off the tree, the branch, and the fruits are attached? You said that it's considered removed from the tree. Telushin l'chol devrayim, for everything. It's not chayav on Shabbos, and it's not chayav on, and it's not and it's makabel tumah because it's fruits. So let's go to the yavshu, when it's dried, just like by telushin. Just like by when you cut the entire branch off the tree and the fruits are attached. You said that it's considered food relative to Shabbos and it's considered food relative to Tumah. So let's go to the one that says that it's attached to the dried fruits. We'll also say that is considered attached for all things, for Tumah and for Shabbos. That means that it's not makabel Tumah, even though it's dried, and it's chayav if you take it off on Shabbos. The problem is that contradicts what Shmuel said. Shmuel said it is makabel tumah. It's considered fruit. It's considered dried fruits that are severed from the tree, even though they're still attached. Gemara says, "Midi area. Do you have to take it like that?" Hakadisa, vakadisa. Each one has its own halachas. When it came to telushin, it was regarding everything, Shabbos and tumah, and minagei mechubarim. It's only regarding Shabbos. Minagei tumah. Maybe it's still makabel tumah. If it's dried on the tree. No, it's not a kasha on Shmuel.
the lashon here, it says Elam Shenif
Shenifshach.
Shach. So that makes it sound like it's like a nif, like a nis. I say nif nispaya. Like not that you broke off the branch, but the branch broke off.
Right.
So
Right.
it might be different. You know what I'm saying? Like if you broke off the branch, you were doing something. If the thing broke off by
Yeah.
itself,
You might be right. You might be right.
because the way they translate it is a tree from which a branch broke off.
You
As
might be
opposed to
right.
a person doing the malacha.
Correct. That's a good point. That's a good point. I don't know
You were
exactly,
looking for
but
his spoil.
I'm just
The
guessing.
spell,
That
right.
was the word.
Spell?
you have a
right,
good you have a good point. Nishchata, the yeshiva guys don't know that stuff.
They never learned it.
The girls learn
Garfinkel, you heard him?
Yeah.
Sean? And he used to
Yeah,
teach
yeah.
in
in the Lubavitch yeshiva.
yeah, he taught in English. One of the English studies was dictum.
Oh,
Who's
he
that?
did it on the general studies. He did diktik
Yeah.
on the general studies.
Yeah.
Who's
That's
that?
interesting. Grammar.
Who's that?
He was Rabbi
Rabbi
Garfinkel.
Garfinkel and Lubavitch yeshiva. Okay, nishchata behema. If the animal was shechted, so we have a machlekes Reb Meir and Reb Shimon. If you see, we had a limb that was dangling off this animal, so we said that this limb could become tamei. The only thing is that it needs to be wet. It needs to get wet to be susceptible to food, to the tumah food. Let's say you shech the animal. So we always said that the shechita makes it huchsher, is considered making it wet. Reb Meir says, yeah, that's taka how it is. You shech the animal, so this limb that was partially severed before is now wet and it's makabel tama. And Reb Shimon says no, it's not considered like it got wet from the shechita. So now we're going to have about 6 interpretations of what the machlekes Reb Meir and Reb Shimon is. I didn't bring out the charts. You don't have the charts here, do you? The papers? The Tanaim Amoraim?
Yeah. I don't think so.
As you go through this, you're just going to see that it works in order. It goes down the generations.
That
Okay.
other chart you have there has the generations on the side column.
So over here,
One of those pages.
So this is Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon.
no. What I'm looking for is we're going to go through Rabba, Abaya. We're going to quote Rabbi Yechon, but that's not the Rabba, Abaya, Rava, Rav Papa, Rav Achabred, Rav Yika, and Rav Ashi. And it's really in layers of generations. It's in, it's layered here according to chronology. B'mai kamiflagi. What is the machlekes between Reb Meir and Reb Shimon? Reb Meir and Reb Shimon are the students of Rabbi Akiva. So Amar Rabba explains the machlekes. Again, Reb Meir says that by the shechita it makes this dangling limb susceptible to tumah by getting it wet. Reb Shimon says that it doesn't. So Rabba says bebehema nasas yad le'ever kamiflagi. The question is, I have an entire animal and I have a dangling limb. So does this large animal become a yad, a handle, to this dangling limb? Does the animal become a yad? In other words, if I get the animal wet, is it considered like I got that little thing wet at the end? Mar Savar, Reb Shimon holds ein behema nasas yad le'ever. Mar Savar and Reb Meir holds behema nasas yad le'ever. You did a shechita. The blood comes out and it gets the neck of the animal wet. But meanwhile, on the back, you have a piece of the leg is hanging off. So is it considered like that dangling piece is wet now because the neck got wet with the shechita? Is the animal considered a handle? After you get the handle wet, it's considered like you got the object wet. That's the machlekes. Abaya says machlekes is a little different. Machlekes is, look, if I take the animal, that dangling limb is going to get schlepped along with it if I'm going to move it. However, if I try to schlepp that dangling limb, I'm not going to get the animal, it's going to come off. So the machlekes is, do I consider it attached or detached? Do I consider it that it's one thing, because if I pull the whole animal, it's going to come along? Or do I say, no, if you try to pull that little thing, you'll see it's not going to come along with the animal's not going to come along with the little dangling limb. So, Mar Savar Eichas Bekatan Vengadal Eily Imai Hario Kamayo. One says that even though if you pull the little part, the larger part is not going to come with it, it's still considered attached. That's Reb Meir's opinion. Umar Savar, the other one holds Eina Kamayo. The other one says no, it's not considered attached. So just because you got the animal wet doesn't mean you got that other part wet, and that's not considered susceptible. So that's machlekes from Meir and Reb Shimon.
So it's a great quiz question. When is the hechsher from doing a shchita good and bad? Because this one there's a hechsher that the animal's kosher and a hechsher that the limb is not kosher. Right? According to the lesson.
The hechsher. It's called hechsher. Making it susceptible is called hechsher. Okay, now we say, V'af Rabbi Yochanan Savar, Rabbi Yochanan holds like this, that Ba'ichas begat, Rabbi Yochanan would agree to Abaya's interpretation, that Rabbi Meir holds that if you pull the smaller part and it's going to be removed, it's still considered one with the animal. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. It's an interesting opinion. Rabbi Yochanan said,
Reb Shimon, who was it? Reb
Reb Shimon and Reb Meir.
So Reb Shimon always holds that it's not susceptible, that it doesn't make a difference.
Right.
It's not.
That it's not considered attached to this.
A dangling. Okay.
So, the Rabbi Yochanan Rami, because Rabbi Yochanan posed this as a contradiction, and he had to answer it up. So from this contradiction, from his answer, it's going to prove that he agrees to Abaya's interpretation of Rabbi Meir. The Rabbi Yochanan Rami, the Rabbi Meir, he posed the contradiction between Rabbi Meir's opinion. It says, Miyam Rabbi Meir eiches bekatan v'engadali Eily imai hario kamayu. Does Rabbi Meir hold that if you grab the smaller part of this animal and the larger part doesn't come with it, that it's still considered one? I'll show you a contradiction. It says, let's say I have a food that's divided, but it's not divided entirely. It's split, but it's still slightly attached. And someone that went to the mikveh needs to wait for nightfall to become totally pure. He's called a tvul yaim, right? Like the first Mishnah in Brachas. When the Kayanim come in to eat their truma, that means that they went to the mikveh and they have to wait for nightfall. When they come back in to eat, that's when nightfall they're tar. But here he's called a tvul yaim. So if he touches whatever the tvul yaim touches, is going to become a shlishi, I guess. So he's considered a sheni. So it's mu'urah b'mikveh, that's slightly attached. Reb Meir says, "Imaiches bekatan v'gad laila imai hareo kamayo." Only if you would pull the smaller part and the larger part would come with it, then I'll say it's considered one, and then it's going to make it tamei. The question is, can the first part make the second part tamei? As you're touching one side, will the whole thing become tamei or not? Well,
He says
depends.
it does.
It depends if it's strong enough attached that if you pull it, it's going to be drawn. The larger part will be drawn with the smaller part. V'im lav eina kamayo. But if not, it's not considered attached. Now here's the problem, because Reb Meir Bais holds that if you pull the smaller part, it's going to get severed. It's not going to be considered attached. And nevertheless, it's considered one. It's considered moksha l'kabel tumah by the shechita. This contradicts what he says here. Now from this contradiction, we're already seeing that what Rabbi Yochanan holds, because he's posing the contradiction. Vam Rabbi Yochanan, in order to answer the contradiction, Rabbi Yochanan says, Machlefes Hashita, that in this case, Rabbi Meir has, Machlefes Hashita either means that we have to change which opinion holds what, it means we switch the names in the opinions, or we have to say that here he changed his opinion for a specific reason. Whatever the case is, I see very clearly that Rabbi Meir holds that if you pull the smaller part, even if it's going to get severed, it's still considered one with the animal. Why? Because if I pull the larger part, it's going to get drawn with it. That means that if I do a shechita and the larger part of the animal gets wet, the smaller part is also considered wet. So the Gemara says, "My kusha, what was Rabbi Yochanan's question? Dil mashani leila Rabbi Meir bein tvul yom l'shar tumas. Maybe Rabbi Meir makes a difference. By a tvul yom, it's tumah derabanan. We're more lenient. We say that it needs to be totally attached for the tumah to take effect. Over here, tumah deraisa, we're going to be more machmer. We're going to say that it is considered attached." So the Gemara says, Tanya, that's not a good answer, because Rabbi Yomer echad tful yom v'echad shar tumas. That this halacha applies whether it's a tful yom or other tumas. So Rabbi Yochanan has a strong question. There's a contradiction in Rabbi Meir. Do we say that the smaller part is considered attached to the larger part, even though it would get ripped off if I would try to schlep it. And it's a contradiction. In one place, Reb Meir says it's considered attached. The other place, Reb Meir says it's considered separate. And you don't answer me that the difference is Benegei the Tumah, because Rabbi says, Rabbi's not Reb Meir or Rabbi Yochanan or any of, it's another opinion that comes in here. Rabbi says that that halacha that applies to Tvul Yaim, means the person that went to the mikveh that needs to wait for nightfall, applies to other tumas as well. So don't answer me that it has to do with which tumah it is, because Rabbi says that it doesn't. The Gemara says, "V'dilma l'Rebbe shani lei l'Rameir shani lei." That's not a reason to ask a contradiction on Rameir. That's a problem with Rebbe. Reb Meir maybe doesn't agree with that. So according to Rebbe, you have a kasha. According to Reb Meir, you don't have a kasha. Reb Meir doesn't have to accept Rebbe's interpretation. So Amar Rabbi explains that Hachem Rabbi Yochanan, what Rabbi Yochanan meant when he asked the contradiction is L'divrei Rebbe machlefes hashita. According to Rebbe, I have to switch the names of in Reb Meir's statements because I can't get this to fit with Rebbe, the way Rebbe interprets Reb Meir. Okay. That so far we had Rabba and Abaya. Comes along Rava. It's interesting. Is Abaya older than Rava? How does it work whenever we quote Abaya and Rava? Does Abaya always mention first? We have to follow this as we learn
Usually
through.
it's
I think so.
Abaya is always
Abaya
mentioned
and
first?
Rava.
Okay.
It's alphabetical.
Over the next 7
It's
years, you'll have to. Rava Amar b'yesh yad l'tumah ve'ein yad l'hechsher k'miflegi. This is a discussion that we mentioned before. We know that there's handles for tumah. That means if you touch the handle, the object becomes tameh. The question is, if you make the handle wet, is it considered that you made the object wet? So Rava says that's the machlekes here. Marsa v'yesh yad l'tumah. This one holds yesh yad l'tumah. Actually, everyone holds yesh yad l'tumah. But the question is, v'ein yad l'hechsher. But Reb Shimon says, but you made the handle wet, which is the animal, but you didn't make that little piece wet. Mar savar, Reb Meir holds yesh yad l'tumah l'hechsher. That if you got the animal wet, it's as if you made that little dangling limb wet as well. Rav Papa Amar, Rav Papa has an interesting interpretation. He says, "Behechsher koydem machshava k'miflegi." You made it wet before you decided that you're going to give that piece of the animal to a non-Jew to eat. You see, a Jew can't eat it. But the question is he going to give this to a non-Jew? So in other words, it's not really food. Right now, it's not considered food. So the Tanan, as it was taught in a Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, Kacha Rabbi Kiva Sheni. Rabbi Kiva used to teach the following: Chelev shchuta, fat, kosher fat. You could give it to a guy. A Jew can't eat it. You can give it to a guy. B'kfarim, in the small villages, tzarech machshava vein tzarech hechsher. Two possibilities. In the small villages, they had a lot of meat. They wouldn't eat the fat. The fat was, if you didn't have anything, you would eat the fat. They would eat the meat. The fat, they would just throw it. Tzarech machshava. And you have to think about eating it in order for it to become food. Vein tzarech hechsher. However, it doesn't need to become wet. Why? Shekvar huchsher b'shchita, because when you shechted the animal, everything, it's considered like everything got wet here, because the animal gets wet. It doesn't have to get washed on every single spot. The animal got wet. So Amarti Lefanav, this is what Rabbi Kiva taught. Rabbi Yehuda is saying, so I told him, Limaratanu Rabbeinu, has our teacher not taught us, right? Olshin and dives, shelikton, that were collected, vidichan lebehema, vidichan, and they were washed for animal food. So animal food is not makabel tumah. It needs to be human food is makabel tumah. V'nimlach aleim ladam, but then you decided, you know what? No, this is a nice piece. I'm going to eat this. I'm going to bring this home, not for the animal. So tzrichas hechsher sheni. You have to wash it again. Now that means for it to be makabel tumah. So he's saying that if it's not considered food until you think about it. So let's go back to the chelev. Chelev in the villages is not considered food. You're not going to give it to the guy to eat because they have enough. They don't need your fat. It's a waste product. It's not food. So, but then you decide later on that you're going to use it as food. So you can't go back and say that the shechita that I did before made it wet. Why? Because at that time that the shechita it wasn't food. Just like the endives. The endives, you thought they would be. You didn't think, you thought that they would be used for animal food. and they got wet. But then so it's not makabel tumah. Then you changed your mind to use it for human food. You didn't have to wash it again. So Rabbi Akiva's contradicting himself. So v'chazer Rabbi Akiva liyashenik Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Akiva changed his mind. He says, Rabbi Yehuda, you're right. And he goes back
In tzorcher.
and he says that tzarech hashasheni, that you have to wash off this. So here, what's going on is Mar Savar La Kamikara. One opinion holds, like Rabbi Akiva held in the originally,
Didn't
which
say
is
which
Reb Meir.
opinion.
Reb Meir holds that it doesn't need to get wet again. The shechita made it wet, even though you didn't have thoughts of feeding this to anyone. Mar Savar La Kechazara. The other one holds, Reb Shimon holds Kechazara, that the shechita didn't work because you didn't have intention to use this as food until afterwards.
And therefore wouldn't be makabel.
And therefore it's not makabel tumah until it gets wet again.
And they're all, everything is according to their.
Yeah, it fits in.
Fits in.
Ravacha Breder Ravika Amar ben Iskana Chadam ben Simon Lasima Kamiflagi. This is interesting. Now we're talking about that. You see, in these last opinions, we're not talking about that the animal got wet and not the limb. Now we're talking about that the limb got wet. The question is, does it help because it's not food? That was that opinion. Even though the limb itself got wet, the first opinions were saying the animal got wet and not the limb. Is it considered a yad? Now we're saying no, the limb got wet. First of all, according to Rav Papa, it wasn't food yet when it got wet. It has to get wet again according to Rav Shimon. Ravacha Breder Ravika says that it got wet, but it got wet by the beginning of the shechita, and then it got wiped off. It got cleaned off, and by the end of the shechita, it was already dry. Shechita takes a few moments. Mar Savar, this one holds Yeshna l'shchita mitchila vad seif. The shechita starts at the beginning until the end. So what blood got on this animal? Blood of shechita, because the shechita starts in the beginning. V'haydam shechitahu. Now the blood of shechita is considered liquid to make something susceptible to tumah. However, Mar Savar, Reb Shimon holds Eino l'shchita el l'seif. Shechita is only at the end. What blood got on this limb? Blood from a wound. It wasn't blood from shechita, because that's not shechita yet until the very end. And by the time the shechita took place, it was already dry. So this wasn't blood that could make something susceptible to tumah. B'haydam makahu. This is just blood from a wound. Okay. Now we're up to the last answer here.
Amen.
Ravashi Yamar B'shchita machsheres v'lei dam k'miflagi. This we mentioned before. If there's no blood, does the shechita itself make it susceptible to tumah?
What do you mean if there's no blood?
Does shechita itself let's say there was no blood by the shechita. Does the shechita, then we'll apply it here. Here it doesn't matter if there's blood. But does the shechita itself make it achshevei? Like, oh, you did a shechita on this. It doesn't matter. Now it's significant and it's considered prepared to be susceptible to tumah. Usually it requires washing it off to prepare it. But there's an opinion that hold that the shechita itself, you did a shechita on it, it doesn't need to be washed off. It's already considered chashuv and it's considered a finished product and it's ready to be it's susceptible to tumah.
With no dam?
Well, it would be very abnormal. Here, to go with our case, it doesn't matter if there's dam or not. Why? Because I can go according to any of those opinions that we said before, that there's no yad, that even though you got the blood of the animal, the blood went on the animal, it didn't go on this. I have many ways of explaining it, even if there's blood. What's my point? Over here, I had shechita, but the shechita wasn't effective to allow it to be eaten. So, what we're looking for here is Reb Shimon holds that I don't really have a good shechita here because it's not susceptible. It's because I can't eat it. So Reb Shimon would require the shechita to be effective in order for it to take effect. Reb Meir holds that, what's Rabbi gonna hold?
It's not really shchita.
What do you mean the shchita to be effective to take effect?
In other words, the shchita isn't allowing this
So the
meat.
hechsher.
This meat is not going to be allowed to be eaten. Why? Because it's partially severed before the shchita. So when the shchita is being done, Reb Shimon holds that the shchita makes the meat susceptible to tumah even if it doesn't get wet. The only thing is that part of this animal is not getting permitted.
Kosher, yeah.
Part of this animal isn't getting permitted. So according to Reb Shimon, the shchita, which is supposed to be making it mukhshir l'kabel tumah, isn't working on part of the animal. Reb Meir would have to hold that
He was strict. I thought we said all the time. He said that it is part.
that it has to be part. Reb Meir would have to hold that it's actually getting wet. In other words, I was explaining this where there's no blood, but it could be that Reb Shimon holds that the blood of the shechita anyways doesn't make it wet. Maybe everything is getting wet. Reb Shimon holds that the blood of the shechita doesn't make it susceptible. It's the shechita that makes it susceptible. That's the pshat. And since over here the shechita isn't working on that part, so it's not considered mukhshir. And Reb Meir holds that no, that it's the blood that makes it mukhshir, and the blood got on the animal, and so therefore it's susceptible to tumah. Okay, those are all the interpretations. Bais Rabba. If you remember, Rabba was our first interpretation. Rabba said that the animal, the machlekes Reb Meir and Reb Shimon, is if the animal is considered a handle to that little part. Behema nasas yad le'ever. Is the animal considered a handle for one limb? Rabba's question now is, let's say, you see, this limb is considered severed. So it needs to get wet in order for it to be makabel tumah. If we hold behema nasas yad le'ever, when were we saying that? By the shechita. Let's say the animal is walking around, and you give the animal, you wash it off. You wash off its face. Is that limb at the other end now susceptible to tumah? Because by the shechita you said behema nasas yad, according to Reb Meir, but that's only after it's dead. Maybe it doesn't apply when it's alive, or maybe not. Look, or maybe it applies even while the animal is alive, even though the animal while it's alive is not makabel tumah. But it's still a yad for the shechita. It's still a yad for the aver, for that limb that's dangling.
Yad if it can't be makabel, so it can't
because it's a handle, just like a bone. A bone is not makabel tumah, but if it gets wet and there's meat attached to the other end, if I hold yesh yad lehechsher, it becomes it's as if the meat was makabel tumah. It's a very interesting question. The Gemara says take him. No answer.